Before I give today's shir, I do want to once again mention the passing of Moron Rav David Feinstein. I mentioned it very briefly last week, and I will not discuss his godless and Torah in Psak, just what was most striking to me. My first cousin, Rabbi Yosef Weiss, who was a great Talmid Chacham, he's a son-in-law of Reb Reuven Feinstein. He married Reb Reuven's daughter, Reb Reuven Shiabod L'chaim Toivim Va'aruchim, Reb Moshe's other son. So since we became a Chatonim, I had the opportunity to know the family. And at various different occasions, I spent some time with Reb David. I never really engaged him deeply in halachic discussions, but what always struck me was his anova, his pashtus. I hope you'll take me lightly, but his beautiful straw hat, which was a symbol to me of anova and pashtus. That's an amazing pasuk. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest individual ever to live. That is clear from Psukei HaChumash, from Bavli, from Yerushalmi. It's in the Rambam more than once. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest individual ever to live. We cannot evaluate or measure, but it is clear from Chazal, greater than the Ovis HaKdoshim, greater than anyone else. And he was the greatest honor ever to live. There's an amazing medrash. The medrash says, Klal Yisrael legefen nimshalo. Klal Yisrael is nimshal legefen in many ways, but one of the ways we find in medrash, the geffen is a vine. It doesn't have a thick trunk like other trees that give fruit. It's a vine. It needs support. And the bigger the cluster of grapes is, the heavier it is, and gravitation pulls it down. So you need to be a Godel Yisrael to evaluate Gedol Yisrael. You need to be a tremendous Talmid Chacham to know to evaluate and to judge the godless of different Gedolim. But Chazal give you a very simple siman. Ma ish koilish shebegefen kol hagodol mechaveiro inamo cheimenu af Yisrael. Kol hagodol mechaveiro inamo cheimenu. You want to learn about the greatness of Gedol Yisrael, observe their ways. Just observe their ways. Kol hagodol mechaveiro inamo cheimenu. That is the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu. Chunan Peites, the Gemara says, אומר הקודש ברוך הוא ליסוד חשקני בכם ישראל, אפילו בזמן שאני משפיע לכם גדולה, אתם ממעטתם את עצמכם. Even when I bestow upon you greatness and glory and fame, אתם ממעטתם את עצמכם. And the Gemara brings 3 examples of Gedolim that were bekvoidoi shel olam, and they were paragons and extreme in their anova. השפעתי גדלו לאברהם אבינו, ואומר, ואונכי עופר ואיפה. השפעתי גדלו לדוד המלך, ואומר, ואונכי תולעז ולא איש. השפעתי גדלו למוישה ואהרון, and they said, ואנחנו מו. And the Gemara says, גודל מה שנאמר במוישה, ומה שנאמר באברהם ודוד. The Shvus Yankov is a beautiful pshat. ואיש מוישה עונב מועד מכל אדם. Adam is 3 letters. Rosh Tevis, Avraham, David, Moshe. Moshe was the greatest honor of the 3 of them. Avraham Avinu says, Anochi of Avefer, but of Avefer is something, it has a certain worth. Anochi Tolaz v'lo yish. but a tolas is something. Some worms are more worth than others. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't even find what to compare himself. V'nachnu ma, we are nothing. Who are we? So Moshe was the greatest son of. Rav David was truly one of the great Gedolei Yisrael. But he was, in many ways, he reminded me of HaRav Pam Zecher Tzaddik Levrocha, who had the similar tchunas, the similar midas. And that is what is so beautiful about Gedolei Yisrael, their pashtus, their accessibility, their anava, their modesty. It's a great loss for Klal Yisrael. And many times when I speak about Gedolei Yisrael, who passed away at a very ripe old age, I think Rav David was more than 90 years old. But nevertheless, it's the same loss. Kosher silukan shel tzadikim kesreifes beis Elokeinu. So when tzadikim passed away, Chazal say it's like Chorban Beis Hamikdash. Because every tzaddik, every Gedolei Yisrael embodies Hishras HaShechina. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, nobody asked, how long was this building standing? 400 years. So how long do you expect a building to stand? 400 years. Nobody said that. Because the Beis Hamikdash is not a building. It's not a structure like any other. The Beis Hamikdash is the Shechina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when the Beis Hamikdash was burnt and reduced to ashes, totally irrelevant how long did that house stand. The same regarding Gedolei Yisrael, it's not relevant how old Rav David Feinstein was. When we have Gedolei and we have Shechina, we have a Kodesh Baruch Hu dwelling amongst us. And that is why Chazal say, Silukam shel tzadikim is kasreifes beis Elokeinu. Besides the inspiration and the guidance, and just seeing a Gedolei Yisrael and learning from his ways, it's a tremendous loss for Klal Yisrael. He should be a Melech Yosha. We should learn from his ways and follow in his footsteps. And we should be Zeicher B'Korov T'Tchias HaMesim. So the topic we will be discussing today is a fascinating one. Last week we spoke about the fundamentals, about the Haggadah of Meleches Bishul. And as we said, today we're going to deal more with the halachic implications. And as Rabbi Gottesman just said, our topic today is alternative ways of Bishul. The most notable, not the only one, but the most notable is micro ovens. So would it be Bishul D'Oraisa when you cook or heat food in a microwave oven? I think I mentioned last week, it's not really a relevant question halacha l'maisa because there's no way to use a microwave oven without being over on other isurim. How do you activate the oven? You must press a button, you must close the door. And if you're using a Shabbos clock, I'm not familiar whether you could use a Shabbos clock with a microwave oven, but if you do, it's not going to be a D'Oraisa anyway because you're not doing a malacha on Shabbos. You did whatever you did on Erev Shabbos when you set up the timer. And if you're using the oven on Shabbos, you're over just by using an electrical appliance. And maybe sometime we will deal about electricity on Shabbos, which is a separate discussion. I don't even remember whether we dealt with it or not, because after giving 30 shiurim, I can no longer remember what we spoke about and whatnot. In this stage of my life, I no longer remember what I say, where, and when, because Baruch Hashem, b'siyata d'shmai, I've been giving so many shiurim in different places on different sugyas. So the question of Bishul in a microwave oven is not really a halacha l'maisa question, but it is so fundamental and important because it defines one of the most yesodistic concept and anecdotes in Meleches Shabbos. So let's embark on our journey. Shabbos Lamed Tes Amud Aleph is the source of the sugya, Bishul B'chama. So the Gemara makes it very clear. Bishul B'ur v'tol the Se'ur is a malacha d'oraisa. If you're mavashel using fire or taldois eish, water that was boiled by fire, that is Bishul D'Oraisa. Bishul B'chama mutar lechatchila. There's no issur at all. So you could take a cup of water or a pot of water or an egg and expose it to extreme sunlight. Yes, if you go out to the desert, you could boil water with sunlight. That is mutar lechatchila. There is no isa bishul v'chama. Told us chama. Water that was boiled in sunlight by the rays of the sun, that would be an isa d'Rabbanan. It's a gzera. Told us chama. Oto told us ha'ur. But bishul b'chama is not defined as bishul. Why not? The result is the same. That water will be brought to Yad Seledes boy. It could even boil. So why would it make a difference? What is the source of heat that you utilize to achieve your goal? Whether it's fire or it's the rays of the sun. One could argue the sun is fire. The sun is like a huge fireball, but that's not relevant. It's not fire the way we know it. It's not fire that we put on. It's not fire here, fire up there in the skies. That's not fire. So Bishul b'chama mutar lechatchila, Bishul ba'or v'tolda suwarasa diuraisa tolda schamo gzeira to tolda suwar. Why is Bishul b'chama not defined as Bishul? Because of Rashi Shabbos Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. Ein derech Bishul bekach. What's pshat in Rashi? Usually in Hilchos Shabbos and in Masechet Shabbos, when we learn about derech Bishul, or derech Kosev, or derech Haitzah, or the derech referring to any other malacha, that is the concept of kel achar yad. When you do a malacha, any malacha, not in the normal fashion, but in an abnormal way, in a strange way, which makes it somewhat difficult to achieve your goals, that is defined as kel achar yad, and it's not min haTorah. What is the heter of kel achar yad? I think in one of our previous shurim I pointed out an interesting phenomenon, which is unique for Talmud Torah, Torah Shabbat. You could learn the entire Masechet Shabbos and not find the source. Why is kel achar yad mutar min haTorah? Why is it only in Issa d'Rabbanan? I do not recall any of the Rishonim in the entirety of Masechet Shabbos who explains what is the heter of kel achar yad. You could go through the Rambam Hilchos Shabbos, 30 prakim, Hilchos Shabbos, Shulchan Aruch, with the Neisei Kelim and the Bis Yosef. I do not recall anybody explaining what's the heter of kel achar yad. It is only Even Ezer Siman Kuf Chav Gimel and Hilchos Gittin that we find an explanation. Why is kel achar yad not also min haTorah? How does it get into Hilchos Gittin? Because the Gemara in Shabbos says Kosev b'smol is potur, it's kel achar yad. We find that in Shin Mem in Hilchos Shabbos. However, in Kuf Chav Gimel Even Ezer, the halacha is get shekosev b'smol is a kosher get. So why Kosev b'smol Shabbos is not derech ksiva, and the kosev l'sefer krisis, it's a valid get. Both the Beis Shmuel and the Chelkas Machokik at the beginning of Siman Kuf Chav Gimel Even Ezer explain the Ptur Kosev b'smol is kel achar yad, and that is halacha which is relevant only in Hilchos Shabbos, has nothing to do with Hilchos Gittin. Why is that? Kel achar yad is not maleches machshavos, and the concept of maleches machshavos is not relevant only by Shabbos. In other areas of Torah, we don't need maleches machshavos. So what is kel achar yad? Any malacha you perform in an abnormal way, not in a normal fashion, is not maleches machshavos. And I think the first year I gave in Malachas Shabbos, I spoke about maleches machshavos, and I quoted Targum Onkelos in Shabbos, and Rashi in Beit Daf Yud Gimel, Targum Onkelos in Parshas V'Yakel, maleches machshavos ividas umnavan, maleches ha'uman. So a craftsman does malachas in a normal fashion, in the most effective way. So if you do a malach in a strange way, which makes it somewhat awkward and difficult to achieve your goal, that is kel achar yad, it's not maleches machshavos, and that is why it's mutar. Could that be the kavanah of Rashi? Bishul b'chama is not derech Bishul? No, definitely not. Because mitzad meleches ha'adam, there is no difference whatsoever how you boiled the water. So you have two pots. Both are boiling water. On your right-hand pot, the water was boiled by fire. On your stove, the left-hand pot was boiled by the sun. And you have two eggs. You drop one into the right pot, one into the left pot. On the right pot, you're chayiv, koros, chatos, and it's a diuraisa. The left one is a derabanan. It's only told as chama. Mitzad avodas adam, there's no difference. It's the same. In Shabbos Lamites we learn, Bishul b'chamei Tveria. There's a machlokes. It depends what is the origin of the heat that heats up chamei Tveria. If it's al pischo shel gehenim, it's fire. It would be a diuraisa. If it's not pischo shel gehenim, it would be a derabanan. We took water out of chamei Tveria. It's the same water. It's the same act. It's the same deed. Exactly the same. But it depends. What is the origin of the heat of chamei Tveria? If it's eish, it's diuraisa. If it's not eish, it's derabanan. So we cannot understand Rashi ein derech bishul b'kach kalach yad. It is not kalach yad. I'll give you a gewaldige chiddush that we find in Chuvas Marach or Zeruah Simon Lamed Aleph. Marach or Zeruah is the son of the great or Zeruah, of Rabbi Yitzchak or Zeruah, one of the Rishonim. And he argues that by Meleches Bishul, the Bechlal is no concept of kalach yad. There is no ptur of kalach yad. And this takes us back to one of our previous shiurim. Bishul is unique amongst all the malachas, because in Bishul, all you could do is begin a process. There are two ways to perform meleches Bishul. Either by putting fire under a pot, or by putting the pot on fire. Benkach or benkach, both methods. All you're doing is enabling a process that will come into fruition after some time. There is no such thing that a person is mevasel biyodov, bikoichoi. And therefore, according to Marach or Zeruah, if you put the pot on your fire in a strange way, you're holding your hands behind your back and you're holding a pot, walking backwards, putting the pot on the fire without seeing actually what you do. Would you be potter? Marach or Zeruah says no. Why would it make a difference how you put the pot on the fire? The actual malach is achieved after 10 minutes, after a half hour, after an hour, when it's cooked. And therefore, by mevashel, there is no ptur of kalach yad. So what is the ptur of mevashel b'chama? Ein derech bishul bekach. Reb Moshe deals with this question in Igris Moshe, Orachaim Chela Gimel Simen Nun Aleph. I'm a tremendous chassid of the Igris Moshe. All my Talmidim know that. But many times I disagree with the Igris Moshe, the Kachi Darka Shel Torah. So for my Talmidim, heard from me many times, no sefer brings me to his battles like the Igris Moshe. And when I learn Igris Moshe, I feel very small. When I learn Igris Moshe, I'm always in the spoil of his greatness. But Igris Moshe, the Svar, is one of the Svarim I very commonly disagree with. Because the Moshe was unique in his derech halimid. He goes all the way back to the Gemara and the Rishonim, to Paskin. And sometimes he ignores hundreds of years of Piskei Achronim. That is part of his gadlus. But that probably is one of the reasons sometimes halacha l'mais I disagree with Anova, with Hachnoah, Kachi Darka Shel Torah. So anyway, what does the Igris Moshe say? The Igris Moshe also says bepashtus, the ptur of chamei Tveria, the ptur of Toldos Chama, the ptur of Bishul b'chama. Rashi says en derech Bishul. It doesn't mean kalach yad. Mitzad masa odam, there's no shinui. It's not like hoitzi masa on roishoi. When you carry something merishus l'shus on your head, that is not derech hoitzah. It's not like koisev bismoil, which is not derech ksiva. So what does Rashi mean en derech Bishul? Reb Moshe says, The Av Malacha is always K'moshe Hoyu b'Mishkan. And all the others of Malacha Shabbos we learn from the Mishkan. So it needs to be Dumya the Mishkan. How do we define Toldos? A Tolda doesn't necessarily need to be Dumya the Mishkan. But a Tolda needs to be Dumya the Av. The Av needs to be Dumya la Mishkan. And the Tolda needs to be Dumya the Av. So Bishul B'chama is definitely not Dumya the Mishkan. In Mishkan, they used fire. The Bishul Samemonim, they used fire. The question is only, why wouldn't Bishul B'chama be a Tolda? So Rashi says, because it's not Ikar Derech Bishul, it doesn't resemble the Av strong enough, and therefore it's neither an Av, because it wasn't the Mishkan, nor is it a Tolda, because it's not the Ikar Derech Bishul. That is the Moshe's approach. And the reason I have difficulty with this is because in Psochim Lamed Tes, Psochim Mem Aleph, I just quoted the Gemara Shabbos Lamed Tes, but in Psochim it's Mem Aleph Omed Aleph. The Gemara says, Bishul B'chama by Korban Pesach would not be an Isur. So let me say in advance, there are three different areas in Halacha in which there is an Isur Bishul. There are more areas in which there are Dinei Bishul. But Bishul as a prohibition, Bishul as an Aveira, three different areas. Bishul B'Shabbos, Bishul B'Bosa B'Cholav, because the Torah clearly says, Lo Savashel Gedi B'Chlei V'Moy. Echod Isar Bishul, Echod Isar Achila, Echod Isar Hanoah, and Bishul B'Korban Pesach. So Psochim Mem Aleph, we clearly learn, Amavashel B'Chama is Poto B'Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach has nothing to do with Mishkan. Korban Pesach has nothing to do with Mishkan. Lametes Malachas we learn from the Mishkan. So what would be the Ptur of Bishul B'Chama by Korban Pesach, according to the Moshe? So Bishul B'Chama, Poto B'Korban Pesach, proves that it has nothing to do with Malachas Machshavos. It's not Kalachiyad. But it also goes against the Yegus Moshe. Has nothing to do with the Mishkan. How about Bishul Bosa B'Cholav B'Chama V'Tol say it's not a Gemara anywhere, but it's a Rambam, Perik Tes Alochavov, Melchas Korban Pesach. Melchas Macholos Asuros. Perik Tes Macholos Asuros is dedicated to Bosa B'Cholav. Perik Tes Alochavov, Melchas Macholos Asuros, the Rambam says, Bosa B'Cholav Bishul B'Chama is Potur, Magid Mishnah, and the Goin both say, we learn Bosa B'Cholav from Shabbos. But if Shabbos, it's because of Mishkan, Bosa B'Cholav has nothing to do with the Mishkan. V'hadre kushya leducht. I discussed this sugya not in Minchas Osha Masechet Shabbos, but rather in Minchas Osha Masechet Psochim. So I don't know whether Rabbi Gersman was aware of that. But my ikar discussion about Bishul in a microwave is not in Minchas Osha Shabbos, but rather Minchas Osha Psochim. So Minchas Osha Psochim, we have two Maduras. Madura Kama was Simen Memtes. Madura Tinyona, it's Simen Nun Aleph. And it is there that I wrote my Mahalach. So let me try to explain it as well as I can. We find a general concept in Halacha. Lav dafka in Hilchos Shabbos, but a general approach in Halacha. When the Torah deals with certain acts or deeds, bein b'mitzvos aseh, bein b'lo ta'aseh, the Torah is referring to the normal phenomena. Deeds that were performed in a normal fashion. I'll give three examples. Shelo k'derech achila. B'macholos asuros, if eat shelo k'derech achila, poto. That's the sugya Pesachim Daf Chav Daled. Big machlokes between Toras Chaim and Oide B'Yehuda. Does the same halacha refer to mitzvahs sheba achila, mitzvahs matzah, mitzvahs achilas kosher, mitzvahs moraya? Achilas mitzvah. Does it have to be derech achila? According to the Toras Chaim, no. According to the Oide B'Yehuda, yes. And the Oide B'Yehuda is right. But in the Gemara, we find only regarding Macholas Asuris. If you eat Shelo Kederech Achili, you're potter. That very same sugya, we learn the same, applies to Isurei Hanoah, Lav Dafke Isurei Achila. You're not over and it's the Urais only if you're Nehana Kederech Hanoah. Bia Shelo Kedarka, regarding Isurei Bia, is number 3. Number 4 is the Gemara in Shavuos Daf Yud Zayin. Bayis hamenuga, hanechnes lebayis derech HaRav. If you walk into a bayis sheyesh bo nega and you walk in backwards, you're not tomei mitzad haboel habayis. You are tomei mitzad kol asher bebayis yitmo. But these two psukim have different halachas. Haboel habayis is only derech bia. So the lashon is the same. Shelo kederech bia regarding isurei bia, but it's a different concept. Shelo kederech bia in Shavuos Daf Yud Zayin is haboel habayis hamenuga. So if you walk into the house backwards, that's shelo kederech bia. It's not defined haboel habayis. What I want to prove from these sources is, besides the concept of kalachayad b'Shabbos, which is unique to Shabbos, there is a general approach, a general yisaid regarding dinei Torah, whether it's isurim, like isur achila, isur hanoah, isur bia, or halachas, dinei tomei tahara. Haboel habayis is not a isur, neither is there a mitzvah, it's a halacha. But the general concept is that Torah deals with normalcy, which phenomena which appears in its normal fashion. Achila shelo kederech achila is not defined as achila. Shelo kederech hanoah is not defined as hanoah. Hanechnas lebayis derech hachorav is not haboel habayis. I think regarding the general concept of Bishul, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Korban Pesach, whether it's Basa B'cholav, the Torah refers to a normal Bishul. And a normal Bishul means Bishul that is achieved with a normal heat source. There is no Bishul without utilizing a source of heat. Without heat, you cannot cook, you cannot bake, you cannot boil. It is impossible to cook or bake without having a source of heat. The normal heat source is fire. Since Adam HaRishon discovered fire, that is what people have been using to warm their bodies, to warm their homes, to cook their food. So derech bishul regarding chamo v'tol deseyo, derech bishul excluding chamo v'tol deseyo has nothing to do with kalachayad. It's not derech bishul mitzad avodas ha'odam. It's derech bishul referring what is the source of heat you are using to cook your food, to achieve your goals. And that is Rashi's kavana when Rashi writes, chamo v'tol deseyo is not derech bishul. The most efficient way to achieve heat is fire. It is very difficult to utilize the heat of the sun or things that were heated by the sun. It is not what people have been doing for thousands of years, and therefore it's not defined as derech bishul. And this is a universal rule, a general rule. Lav dafka beHilchos Shabbos. And that is why it's poshut im Psochem Mem Aleph, that by Korban Pesach there would be no Isav Bishul B'chama v'tol deseyo. And the same is the Rambam Perek Tes Melchas Macholos Asuros regarding Basa B'cholav. And the Maggid Mishnah, and they go and say, we learn Basa B'cholav from Shabbos. How do we know Shabbos? Derech Bishul. Yes, that is a new blick, a new approach to understanding Derech Bishul. And I want to bring another dogma from Hilchos Shabbos, from Masechet Shabbos. Kuf Ches Amud Aleph from Masechet Shabbos we learn. Hatoileish ma'otzet she'einai nakov. You have a plant, a tree, a bush, growing in a flower pot. Otzet she'einai nakov. We're not going to get into details. What is defined otzet nakov? What is otzet she'einai nakov? But if you tear a branch, a leaf, a twig, maybe a fruit, off a tree, a plant that grows, but otzet she'einai nakov potur. Rashi writes, ein derech zriya bekach. And it's a pella. We're not dealing with zoreya. We're dealing with kaitzu. We're dealing with tailish. So how does Rashi explain why is he potter ein derech zriya bekach? What does it have to do with derech zriya? The Gemara isn't dealing with hazoreya ba'otzet she'einai nakov, but rather a tailish ma'otzet she'einai nakov. So why does Rashi say ein derech zriya bekach? Question number 2. Moichek. Person erases letters. Moichek is an av malacha. Would there be an Isser Moichek if the Ksav was written biyad small? Koisa biyad small potter. Ein derech ksiva. Would that make enough kamina by Moichek? Haboine shelo kedarkoi. Would that patter the soiser? Of course not. Soiser is chayiv. Why would it make a difference that the person that built that structure was potter because he built kalachiyad? Why would that make a difference? Hamoichek chayiv. Doesn't matter whether the Kosev wrote those letters, be a min or be small. Pashut. So why does Rashi say ein derech zriya? And that is why the koitzer is potter. My explanation would be the same. It has nothing to do with kalachiyad. If that would be a tree in an open field, but the person that planted that tree, planted it kalachiyad, of course the toilish would be chayiv. When Rashi writes ein derech zriya bekach, he doesn't mean kalachiyad. It means this is an abnormal tree. It's not a normal tree. Ein derech zriya means it's not derech zriya. And therefore this plant, this bush, this tree isn't a normal tree. And that is why koitzer mimeno is not derech tzira. Not mitzad ma'isa ha'odam. Ma'isa ha'odam is exactly the same. Whether that tree would be an otzet tzedakah or otzet she'einai nakov. There's no difference lagabi the toilesh. But you're not chayev on koitzer b'Shabbos or toilesh b'Shabbos only in a normal tree. That is not mitzad malachas machsheves. Has nothing to do with kalachiyad. It has to do with the general principle of derech achila, derech hanoah, derech bia, derech bishul by chamo v'tol doiseyo. There is no Isser koitzer on Shabbos. Only on normal plants, normal bushes, normal trees, a normal chibur lekarka. Otzet she'einai nakov is not mechuber lekarka. It grows in earth. Same minerals, same water, same earth. But it's not a normal chibur. It's not mechuber lekarka oilam. And that is why it's not a normal tree. And there would be no melechas koitzer. That is my understanding why Bishul b'chamo v'tol doiseha, there would be no Isser Bishul, neither by Shabbos, nor by Korban Pesach, nor by Basar b'cholav. So what does this say regarding microwave ovens? In my understanding, a microwave oven would be totally not derech bishul. The Igris Moshe, according to his understanding, his conclusion is microwave ovens would be an Issa D'Oraisa by Shabbos and by anything else, because it's derech bishul. According to Egis Moshe, Bishul B'chama is not derech bishul. In the classical way. It's not derech bishul mitzad ha'adam. And therefore the Torah does not do mi'eda'av. According to my understanding, it is far more remote than Bishul B'chama. And I will explain why. I said Bishul B'chama is not a normal heat source. In a microwave oven, there is no heat source. There is no heat source. Probably most of you are aware of how microwave ovens work. So until this generation, I won't say this generation, but until the age of the Industrial Revolution, when people started to develop amazing technologies and understand science in a more thorough way, the only way to cook or boil or bake was you needed a source of heat. It was either fire, either the sun. What else do we have? Well, we have some hot water bursting out of the crust of the earth, volcanoes giving out lava, but you needed a source of heat. In a microwave oven, there is no external source of heat. We are using electromagnetic waves to cause molecular activity in organic matter. So if you put a piece of metal into a microwave oven, it'll stay cold. If you put glass into a microwave oven and there's nothing in that glass, it will stay cold. It is only organic material that will become hot, cooked, and heated, because microwaves, which are electromagnetic waves, cause molecular activity in organic matter, primarily in the fluids. And the heat is originated in the food, in the liquids you have in the glass. And the glass, the dish, is only heated by the food within. So there is no external heat source. So if Bishul B'chama is not told as Bishul, and in my understanding, it has nothing to do with Darkom Shel Bnei Yodam. It's not Darkom Shel Bnei Yodam. It's about the heat source. It's about Darkom Shel Bnei Yodam 6,000 years ago, in the days of Odom HaRishon, 5,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago in the days of the Gemara. Kalachiyad depends on each generation, on each country. Kalachiyad changes from time to time. But Kalachiyad is a shinui in derech hamalocha shel bnei Adam. However, derech bishul by Bishul B'chama is a different concept. It depends on derech bishul b'shorshoi, in its original form. So the question is, what is the source of heat you're using? In microwave ovens, there is no external source of heat. Those electromagnetic waves are not hot. Electromagnetic waves are never hot. They cause molecular activity in organic material, which releases energy. The food you're cooking, that is the source of heat. The water you're warming, that is the source of heat. The plate and the cup and the glass will only be heated by the food that is being heated. So there is no external source of heat. Did anybody deal with a similar question? Yes. And this is an amazing argument, an amazing machlokes Reb Shlomo Zalman had with the Chazon Ish, the giant, the Chazon Ish. And Reb Shlomo Zalman relates this conversation in Minchas Shlomo. Chelek Aleph, Siman Yud Beis in a footnote. So way before microwaves were developed and invented, in industry, we used water as a conductor, as an electricity conductor. In Lashon Kodesh, in modern Hebrew, it's defined as molich zerem. To heat water, the standard methodology is heating metal, and the metal would heat water. That is what you do in every kumkum chashmali. What's a kumkum chashmali? Every Shabbos urn, every oven. You have the spiral, a metal spiral. With electricity, you heat that spiral. And that gives off heat. So when you want to boil water, you heat that metal guf chimum. Excuse me for my terminology. I try to speak it in English, but sometimes I don't know how to, terminology. So what's a guf chimum? It's a heating element. You heat the heating element, and that heating element will boil the water. So usually you need a conductor that allows the flow of electrons from negative to positive. And the flow of electrons releases energy. That causes heat. So that will heat the element, and the element will cook the water. So man has devised the idea that water itself could be a conductor. And that is what they've done in industries. So you have the negative pole on one side of the pool, the positive pole on the other side of the pool, and the water itself is the conductor. And the electrons would move from negative to positive through the water. And that is far more efficient and economical in heating the water. Instead of heating a metal element, and that would heat the water itself is the element. And the water is the conductor. And the water is the means, the medium to enable the flow of electrons, which is electricity. So Reb Shlomo Zalman argued that would not be an Issur Mevashel because we are not using a source of heat. Electricity is not hot. Electricity lets off heat. Electricity would cause the conductor to become hot. So Reb Shlomo Zalman argued there is no source of heat. The water itself is being heated. And that is exactly similar to microwave technology. So in microwave technology, it is molecular activity, either in organic material or in water, because in every organic material, there is water, there is fluids. So even if we won't define water as organic, but yes, the same thing happens with water as with any other organic material that contains fluids, that contains water. So this very same question was discussed by Reb Shlomo Zalman. And when he argued before the Chazon Ish that there would be no Mevashel, the Chazon Ish said something mind-boggling. And the Chazon Ish said, I think it's Bishul Diorais. Reb Shlomo Zalman asked, why? Why is it different than Bishul B'chama? The Chazon Ish said, Bishul Betoldas Ur is a Diorais. If there is a Toldas Eish, there should be an Ibur of Eish. What? Could there be offspring without pregnancy? Could a child ever be born without being a fetus? Is there a Vlad that wasn't ever a Ubar? So the Chazon Ish said, if there's Bishul Dioraisa Betoldas Ur, there should be Bishul Dioraisa B'Ubar Shel Ur. And electricity is like a Ubar. because it produces fire. It produces heat. Like a ubar, a fetus is potential life. The flow of electrons would be potential fire. So it's the ubar of Eish. Reb Shlomo Zalman was taken aback. Maybe we would say he was blown away. And he said, you gotta be a Rishon to say such a Chiddush. And how did the Chazon Ish respond? It's a davar pashut. And one doesn't need to be the Rashba to say this Chiddush. And Reb Shlomo Zalman writes, 50 years have passed, but I still think it's a gewaldige Chiddush. Since the Minchas Shlomo, since Reb Shlomo Zalman wrote this Shiva, who knows, maybe another 30 years have passed. And I still think it's a gewaldige Chiddush. Too gewaldig. You need to be a Rashba to say it, or a Chazon Ish. You need to be a Rashba to say it, or a Chazon Ish. So my Talmidim know, many times they say to my Talmidim in my koil, the Chazon Ish, in my eyes, was like a Rishon. He was flung 600 years away from his natural habitat. To our generation, we should be able to see how Rishonim learned. So anyway, so the Chazon Ish argued, using water as a conductor, boiling water just by having the flow of electrons pass through the water. There's no external source of heat. Nothing that's hot is causing the water to be hot. The electrons aren't hot. Electricity isn't hot. But the water acting as a conductor is heated. So the Chazon Ish said, if there's toldas ur, there's a ubar of ur. And electricity is potential fire, just like a fetus is a potential child. And I wonder, would the Chazon Ish say the same regarding microwave technology? Or maybe it's different than electricity. Why would it be different than electricity? Both have been harnessed by the human mind, whether it's the flow of electrons or microwave electromagnetic waves. Yes, we find electricity in nature, that's lightning. We find electromagnetism in nature in many forms, but the practical usage and application and implementation of these technologies are human achievement. So probably the Chazon Ish would say the same regarding microwave technology. But I still would argue it's not derech Bishul. If Bishul B'cham is not derech Bishul, then Bishul using the flow of electrons or microwave electromagnetic waves definitely wouldn't be defined as derech Bishul, and therefore, in my opinion, it would not be Bishul Diorais. So I find this to be a fascinating discussion. And the way I understand it, and I made an effort to explain in today's shiur, is Bein legabe Shabbos, bein legabe Basa b'cholav, bein legabe Korban Pesach. Microwave oven would not be defined as Bishul. Would it be defined as Bishul legabe Macholas Asuros? Yes, very much so. Because regarding Macholas Asuros, we're not dealing with Bishul as a prohibition, which needs derech Bishul. We're dealing with Nasinas Tam. And the result would be the same. And therefore, when we're dealing with Bishul, Legabe min b'sha'enoi minoi b'noisen tam bosa b'cholav derech Bishul asra Torah, it would be an Issa Diorais, because the result is the same. After all, you have a cooked dish. Reb Moshe wrote his tshuva, Tovshin Lamed Aleph, exactly 50 years ago. And Reb Moshe writes, microwaves is mamish derech Bishul. The reason we're still cooking on fire is just because These ovens is a new idea, newly manufactured. Most people don't have them yet, but in due time, everybody will use microwave technology. Wrong. 50 years transpired. Everyone has microwaves, but we still cook on fire. It's not exactly the same. And if you want a good sholent, yeah, use fire or electricity. You don't use your microwave oven. And you want to bake a challah or a cake and you want it crisp, you don't use your microwave oven. So it's not exactly the same. And even according to the classical understanding of derech bishul, I still would say, even according to the Moshe was wrong in assuming that it's exactly the same. It's derech bishul. When these ovens will become available to everyone, everyone will use microwaves to cook. No. It's inexpensive. Microwave ovens are available to everyone. And we have them in every home, 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe sometimes more. And we still cook on fire or on electricity, on an external source of heat. It's different. But regarding our shaila, in macholas asuris, it's pashut. The dik is the result. Is there nesina stam or not? Is there blia? Is there plita? And this brings me to a gewaldige chiddush. Isur bishul b'osa b'cholav stands apart. It's not doimed the bishul korban pesach and bishul b'shabbos. Bishul b'osa b'cholav is the same as derech bishul osra toira lagabe isur achiles b'osa b'cholav la'achar bishuloi. We find a fundamental halacha in which bishul b'osa b'cholav is different than bishul b'shabbos, not only regarding macholas asuris, but the isur bishul. So in Yeridea, there's a isur bishul b'osa b'cholav in blia shebedoifen hagedera. If you take a milchige pot, ben yoimoi, and you cook meat in that pot, it's not only that the meat is also b'achila, and the pot is ne'asar medin b'osa b'cholav, you're also over on the isur bishul b'osa b'cholav. But there's only meat in the pot. I didn't put milk into the pot. But the milk is a blia shebedoifen. And that blia is niflat. So you're mavashel b'osa b'cholav. Shabbos, there would be no isur bishul and blia shebedoifen. And that's the difference between b'osa b'cholav and Shabbos. By Shabbos, maleches machshavas asra Torah. Shabbos is a tikkun. By Shabbos, it needs to be tangible. It needs to be something from which person has benefit. Shabbos, it would be no isur on bishul, the blia shenivlo bedoifen hakli. But by b'osa b'cholav, there would be an isur. So maybe by b'osa b'cholav, there even would be an isur on using microwave ovens. Because derech bishul asra Torah, and in any bishul which achieves tam b'osa b'cholav b'tavshel, that also would be defined as an isur bishul b'osa b'cholav. So maybe regarding b'osa b'cholav, there would be an isur even in a microwave oven. Kach nera l'chayim. So the aside I just mentioned, we're going over time. I apologize, but I do want to conclude because I find this a very fundamental sugya. Minchas Osher Shabbos, Samaches, Osvav. I discussed a question that many Gedolim, present-day Gedolim, discuss. Sometimes when I make a coffee Shabbos morning or a tea, you take a cup that was freshly rinsed, and there still is moisture in the cup. And you pour in boiling water from the urn. Would it be a chash bishul on shiorei hakoises? There is moisture. There is water on the defanois of the glass. Do you need to dry the glass before pouring in boiling water from the urn? Some Gedolim say yes. There's a tshuva in Divrei Yatzer from Mori V'Rabbi, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, who besides being one of the great Hasidic Rebbeim of our time, was one of the Gedolei Adoros we all know. And his tshuvas are amazing. So, Divrei Yatzer V'Orachaim Chelak Aleph Kuf Nun Vav. That's a tshuva written to Reb Shlomo Debleitsky. Reb Shlomo Debleitsky was one of the Gedolim in Bnei Brak. And he sent his sefer to the Kloisenberger Rebbe, and he was Meikel, and the Kloisenberger Rebbe has a tshuva, and he writes various different tzirufim on what basis we could be Meikel. And according to the Divrei Yatzer, you don't need to dry the glass before letting in boiling water. So he writes it's a psikresha de l'nichal, and it's pochas mikashir, and it's not derech bishul, and iru mikledish, would only be a bishul derabon, and many tzirufim. But besides all the svoras and Divrei Yatzer, I argue that by Shabbos, it needs to be something that's tangible, something that the person has a benefit from. It's not only Bishul Pochas Mikashir, it is far less than Pochas Mikashir. It is nothing which the person has any benefit from. I apologize 1 second. I just forgot to turn off all the phones in my Daladamas. So I think Shiorei HaKoises is something which is totally insignificant. And that brings us to a tshuva in Chasam Sofer Yodei Tzadik Beis, dealing with a ner shava, which is made of basar b'chalav. Some Sofer writes. So it's solid form. But it needs to become transformed to a liquid form to feed the wick, to feed the fire. That would be defined as Bishul. And if it's basar b'chalav, there would be an Isser. However, Shabbos, there would be no Isser. Because by Shabbos, you need Davar Hanis Bashel Sha'oimed Be'ein. So my svara would be, all Malachas Shabbos are tikkun. And by Shiorei Koises, that would not be defined as a tikkun because it's so minimal and so insignificant. Would not be defined as Malachas Bishul. I just add that on as an other tziruf to the tshuva of many tzirufim that we find in Divrei Yatzer Siman Kuf Nun Vav. So I think today's shiur was very significant, very fundamental, very important, and it's Yisodas Gedolim, Hafoich Bo V'Hafoich Bo Dekula Bo. Looking forward to see you again next week, and have a beautiful day, and make the most of every moment we have of learning together in our virtual base medrash. Kol Tov to all of you.